And now, the really good news is you're not required to listen to me anymore because the cavalry has arrived in the face and body of the one and only Mr. Roy Lilly. So I'm going to hand on to Roy now, who will chair the remainder of the day. Let's hear a hooray.
Big round of applause for John. Give him the clap he so richly deserves. Yes. I apologise for my lateness. It's all down to the London traffic. Right, we've got our next session now. Ladies and gentlemen, would you like to come forward, please? As you can see, no expense has been spent on this session, and they're bringing their own chairs. Sorry. I think a round of applause, really, don't you, for this heroicness. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm not going to plough through everybody's name and what have you on the stage. They can introduce themselves, I think, when they start speaking. But I will introduce John, who's going to chair this program. They're going to introduce us to the mystery of ICSs and money, and it's pretty weird to have those two words in the same sentence because there isn't any. And these unfortunates who are the new kids on the block taking over from the other new kid on the block who took over from the previous new kid on the block have been born into penury because I think we're about 40 billion short or something. So they're going to tell us how they're going to do fantastic services with no money. And that's heroic. A big round of applause for our heroic panel. Over to you.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you very much. And thank you, all of you, for joining here today, joining us for this panel. This is Secrets to Success in the New NHS Funding Landscape. So what we're going to talk about are the secrets to success in the new NHS funding landscape. And we're going to kick it off with a panel, or with a talk. I'll spend about 8 minutes, and then we'll get right into the panel of experts who are going to bring a really good, diverse set of angles to this space. So I'll kick things off here. So I'm John Witt, co-founder and CEO of Stotles. We're the platform for doing business with government or the broader public sector. We have several thousand companies that are on our platform, and the whole goal of what we do is to help teams find, qualify, and action earlier buying signals across the market so that teams can put themselves with the right people, building the right relationships at the right time. And right time meaning before any procurement begins. How do you help shape problem statements, solution statements to help create impact and grow in healthcare? So with that, before I do hop in, I also want to get a view in the room of everyone who is here. So would you mind raising your hand if you're representing a private sector business, private sector side of things? All right, decent turnout. And what about on the healthcare side or public sector side? Anyone with the NHS or buyers? Okay, perfect. Around 70% private sector suppliers, 30% public healthcare. So it's helpful to know who we have in the room. The goal here is to provide something for everyone. An angle, a strategy, a tactic, maybe a resource, at least one concrete thing that you can use today as a buyer or supplier to become a market leader. The things that we're seeing across the market, we want to put these in your hands. There are stress balls out there, there's chocolate out there. Here we're going to provide you something of a different kind of utility so that you can advance and be a bit more of a market leader in the space. And maybe if you have the mental fortitude to overlook my overly keen American accent or obnoxious obsession with using data to navigate public procurement, you might be able to accomplish this goal. So I think we dive right into it. I want to go, start off with a little bit of a trip down memory lane here. NHS restructuring. What is the brief history? So we're going to take a zoom back 50 years, and it kicks off in 1973 with the NHS Reorganization Act, probably the not most ideal politically branded act. Reorganization is not necessarily something looked fondly upon, but what that did is actually established a bit more of a centralized system and brought about these area health authorities. 9 short years later, those area health authorities were completely abolished. You move forward a couple of decades, and you've got a couple of acts that came through, but that led to, in 1994, regional authorities starting to shrink. In this case, from 14 to 8, and then 2 years later, regional authorities completely abolished after being in place for 22 years. Moving forward, a couple of things happened, but in 2001, the Health and Social Care Act of 2001 happened. In 2003, there was another Health and Social Care Act. In 2012, there was another Health and Social Care Act. And that leads us to today, the Health and Care Act, no social. In this case, this is what brings us to today. All the integrated care systems that you've been hearing about were formed off the basis of this act. And just to make sure we're level setting in the room and everyone's coming from the same state of play, most of you are probably aware of what these are, but just to be clear, these came into play in July 2022, statutory requirement by law, and 42 of these integrated care systems were created across England. What these are basically partnerships of local trusts, local authorities, providers that are exclusively designed to improve the outcomes for patients, tackle inequality, and off the back of that, enhance more value for money and improve the taxpayer's pound. So that's what ICSs are, integrated care systems are. And that's kind of how we got here to today. The reason I took us through that little backstory is to basically set the scene for a theme. What does all that change mean for you? And how can we navigate it? How are the market-leading buyers and suppliers in this space navigating all that change? Well, I think the first part of it is embracing. You could look at that timeline and think that we're all just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. I'm not that pessimistic. In fact, I'm quite optimistic that change presents immense opportunity to create impact and to grow for everyone, particularly in the supplier side of the room as businesses. So first step is embracing the change. The second step is the market-leading suppliers in the space deal with it. They don't rebel against it. They deal with it, and when they do deal with it in a really concerted, focused way, really big things happen for the NHS and for themselves as businesses. So when we think about the change that's happening here with integrated care systems, there's a lot. Three things that we can really focus on are first and foremost, the changes in procurement and the flexibility and the relaxation of some of the procurement routes that are coming into the play, higher leveraging of frameworks. That's kind of the first major change that's happening. The second is the changing landscape of decision makers. You've got local authorities, NHS trusts, local providers, a lot more decision makers in the room, and we'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of that in a moment when we get to the more expert panel than I can provide there. And then the last thing is money is moving. £7.4 billion of approved spend have been declared for the 42 ICSs across 23-24 fiscal year. And so the question is, okay, you want to deal with it, you want to be involved, you want to create impact, you want to grow your business. How? That's the golden question here, is the how. So we want to talk a little bit about how the market-leading buyers and suppliers both, but because we have about 70% suppliers in the room, a little bit more focus on suppliers. What are they doing to actually get ahead? What are they doing to position themselves to be in the right place at the right time? So I'm going to spin off a little bit of an example here. I'm going to talk about a customer of ours that's in imaging technology. Things like X-rays, MRIs, those type of topics. And so they provide a really good, crisp example of how a company can be a market leader in the space by focusing on one word, and that word is focus. An intense focus on where they should be spending their time, resources, and energy. And so the way that they do this is top-down. And so what they've actually done is establish the right focus by first and foremost working with us at Stotles, leveraging our reports, leveraging our platform to say, okay, across the 42 ICSs, where is the money flowing and where does opportunity present itself for me to create an impact and me to grow my business? And once they did that, they were able to isolate down, particularly the London ICSs, money flowing to the tune of 1.5 billion. Next level they wanted to take is, well, what's happening within that ICS? So within that ICS, particularly in London, you've got that region, you've got 5 ICSs, and once they took a look at those 5 ICSs, they actually drilled that down into all of them and said, hey, look, where's the actual money going to? What initiatives, what projects, what themes? And for them, you can see number 2 on this list, IT and digital is well within their wheelhouse and capability to drive some impact within the NHS and grow by capitalizing on opportunities. So they used that to go from the right focus at a macro level to the right buyers at a more micro level. And off the back of that, they actually started building relationships, shaping opportunities, finding problems, and partnering with those local authorities, NHS trusts, and providers within this ICS to actually highlight and shape an opportunity that came out the other side. And so what you're looking at here is an opportunity from our platform. But this imaging technology company started earlier in the engagement process using data to focus their time, energy, resource, relationship building power. and off the other side actually found and developed a highly relevant opportunity worth £390,000 that they are well positioned to drive impact within. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, 30,000 feet. I only have 7 minutes of this panel's time to go through these elements, but I did really just want to highlight how the use of data to focus is the common thread that we're seeing amongst market leaders that are working within the NHS and the broader healthcare space. I mentioned, goal here today is to give you at least one concrete thing that you can walk away with. If you haven't gotten any value whatsoever so far, hopefully, here, there's another opportunity. You can scan this code and it'll provide you direct access, no cost, to our NHS Supplier Handbook. And so if you use your mobile device, this will allow you to download. Basically gives you a run-through of all the ICS transition, where the money is flowing, and then specific tactical plans on how to drill down into where to find those opportunities that are highly relevant to your business or your offering. So I'd encourage you to scan this, download it. We do get a lot of buyers and NHS trust providers looking at this as well to get a visibility over how other buyers are doing things. So incredibly valuable, and we've seen a lot of uptake on this so far. With that, I want to stop talking, and I'd like to set up for our panel here. This is where we're bringing in the real experts. So what I'll do is actually introduce our panel here. The whole goal of this is to provide a really diverse set of angles on the NHS transition to integrated care systems and the new funding model. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone on the panel here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, we have the Chief Digital and Information Officer at NHS Bedfordshire, Luton, and Milton Keynes, Mark Thomas. We'll do a little round of applause after I introduce everyone. Second here, we have Liam Cahill, who is a health tech influencer and an advisor to the NHS. And then last but not least, Rammy Arafa, head of sales at Open Medical. So just join me in welcoming and thanking the panel for joining us. I'm going to grab another chair here, and then we will get things fired up. Let's see if I can squeeze in here, Mark. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and kick things off. Looking for a bit of a punchy debate here, a little bit of zest and pep. I think I want to kick things off a little bit. And actually, before we get into that, we will have some pop quizzes. We will have some Q&A time. So if you want to join us at the Slido link here through your mobile device, this will allow you to add in a Q&A question or also add in an answer to the pop quizzes that come up. So with that, I want to start off with a question amongst all three of you here. We've talked about the change. We've talked about the opportunities and the blockers that come with that. So I want to get each of your perspectives on what are the pros and cons of this new ICS landscape, particularly for health tech suppliers in the NHS. And I think, Mark, it's probably best we start with you. Love to get your point of view from someone in an ICS. What do you see as the pros and cons for health tech suppliers?
Good morning, everybody. Hi. So, yeah, Mark Thomas from Bedford, Luton, and Milton Keynes. One of the interesting things is that while we talk about health tech, the ICBs are all about the resident. We've said it on the insight. So it's all about the 1.1 million in our example that we serve within Bedfordshire, Luton, and Milton Keynes. So that moves us away from purely focusing at the hospital. We talk an awful lot about health and health tech. Health tech goes out into the full partners, of which there are 11 partners forming up the ICB. So we need to treat all of the partners and engage with all of the partners and not just think of, in our case, two very large acutes. So they have a vast and important purpose in dealing with healthcare, but we've got the 4 local authorities, we've got social care, we've got the voluntary organisations, community, mental health, we've got a couple of ambulance services, and we need to bring all of that together to bring a combined service for an individual that empowers the individual in their approach to how they participate in their health and care. That's quite a different approach from having siloed organisations delivering elements of care on a care pathway. So the ICB has, you mentioned the 4 elements of the ICB. That is where you get the benefit from, but taking it as a complete system and a complete service based on an individual rather than from an organisation.
And so on that basis, I mean, if you have a more complete, holistic landscape, do you think for health tech suppliers that presents more opportunity to actually get in with an ICB and create more impact and generate more business? Or do you see that as a threat to their ability to do that?
I see it as a breadth. So because if you're doing into specialist health tech, so you're doing diagnostics, AI and diagnostics for second reads, that's going to target a very large audience, very focused, and can have some tremendous outcomes, positive outcomes for individuals. But then if you start to open it up across the domiciliary, the local authority, how we provide care, how we provide people from preventing them coming into the hospital service, that's a huge market where we can start to explore. So it's different from just going directly into what does acute service need, what does a GP service need, how do we provide remote mental health. We've got the whole gambit to go at. So there's a lot more opportunity.
Awesome. Liam, maybe if we transition over to you, if you could provide your point of view on this question. I know you've probably got some opinions.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So I think the first point that we need to sort of, consider here is that we are trying to evaluate the effectiveness of something that is in the process of being built, has never been done in a public sector system like this before, and it is a really, really huge agenda. Like, internationally we're going towards integration. Integration is the direction of travel. It's largely supported by most parties. But this is a new thing, and taking aside the narrative and the benefits of how these systems are going to go, like, in the NHS landscape, it's not just necessarily the ICS. Like, as Mark described, for example, this holistic version of a system we're describing is a huge amount of consolidation. What that means, in the context of what we're discussing, is that you have less organisations that may have agency to buy things. So if you're aware of the What Good Looks Like framework that NHS England or NHS X created before they exploded or imploded, it depends on how you look at it. Like, what this is basically saying is the local system is now going to be having more control. But I suppose the problem that lies herein is that the local system is in transition and is largely, by most of the companies that I know and work with, is seen as impenetrable, very difficult to be able to engage with. In my background, I worked and built an organisation that supported medicines and prescribing across the NHS, and we scaled at the time to work across 220 CCGs. That was 220 different processes, different things we had to go through for a smaller slice. So to make sure that I cover a pro, you've got more organisations, at least one pro, you've got more organisations who have more, you have less more organisations, who have more money, but who have more people trying to work with them. Like, a basic estimate, I think there's about 5,000 health tech companies who are trying to sell to the NHS at the moment. If you take the 42 ICBs and around about 250 providers in those areas, then we're talking about 300 organisations. And if they need around about 10 to be sustainable, that's a lot of competition for a very small number of organisations. So if you manage to get traction with an NHS organisation, then that's great because there's a larger reward overall. But you're competing against a lot more organisations in order to be able to even get a business case in to be considered by the local system. And if you're not in the areas that NHS England is prescribing at the moment, the elective care, the winter crisis and discharges, then it's very, very difficult to be able to put that case across at the moment. But I think that will change. What I would say, though, is that there are some systems who definitely, as I discussed with Mark earlier, who are taking a spirit of the change rather than a letter of the change, and are trying to do more proactive things amongst all of the downward control and bureaucracy. And if you can find those organisations, now don't all go running to Mark and Bedfordshire, because then you get so totally overwhelmed, but actually some of these organisations are there to be able to prove it to the system. So if you can find and work with the right ones, like Bedfordshire, like West Yorkshire, like Dorset maybe, some really good local areas that you can work with in order to kind of get this. So, there's no avoiding the fact it's difficult, and I'll hand over to Rammy, but, I'd say there's definitely more cons than pros at the moment, but in 2 to 3 years, hopefully there will be more pros and cons. Fingers crossed.
Perfect. No, that's great. And Rammy, over to you. I think this will be a really interesting angle as well. A supplier, you're in the shoes of a supplier, and you're facing these challenges head on. Maybe if you could speak from your perspective on these pros and cons, and very quickly as well, how you're wrestling with them.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to kind of draw strong conclusions on whether kind of this new restructure is kind of a success or failure, because we are still in very kind of early stages with it, like you said, only being a year ago. But yeah, there are some key challenges, I think, around kind of resourcing and budget allocation. I think their ICSs are heavily underfunded, heavily under-resourced as well, so there's a lot of challenges from that point of view. Increased stakeholder engagement as well. There's many more people that are kind of getting into these discussions, which I think it can be quite frustrating when you're trying to move things forward. It often slows down the whole process. I think with ICSs as well, there's still a lot of fragmentation of data, and I think that can cause quite a kind of a key issue. In regards to the pros, I think having these ICSs and kind of this aligned strategy should massively help. But I think only time will tell, really, to see how things can progress.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Well, I think shifting gears here a little bit, we've talked about the change, the pros, the cons, the opportunities, the threats that come from that. Probably worthwhile to kind of dig in now a little bit to a bit more forward-looking, like what are these priorities that the ICSs have when it comes to procuring health tech? Because I think that'll set the stage quite a bit for how suppliers in the room can position themselves in line with priorities and the things that matter to ICSs. So maybe, Liam, if we can kick it off with you here, want to get your take basically on like, what are these priorities and how does it affect how a supplier should place themselves in the market?
So there's a set of things. I suppose there's two axes on this, right? What are the thematic priorities and what are the bureaucratic priorities, should we say, for the sake of argument? So in the thematic priorities, like, it's very clear what they are, because if you go and look at the NHS, elective care is continuing to grow and continuing to spiral, and that needs to be addressed, and obviously that's a key area. Winter crisis, discharge, transfers of care into areas where virtual wards can be provided is obviously a very big one. Population health management, I think in this landscape, I think because there is a very singular focus. I'm trying to move out of the light of this projector as well. Is that a lot of organisations are probably putting the majority of their time and effort and money into very similar things. I'll just go back to the consolidation agenda as well, because realistically, and I don't necessarily call this health tech, but we need to think about where the budget is going. A significant amount of time and energy and money is going into making sure everyone's got a patient record system in their area, basic IT infrastructure, basic skills, and whilst this isn't the kind of thing that many of you will be providing, it's what you're competing against in terms of the budget alignment, because if they don't have the right platforms, then obviously they're not going to be confident and able to put these into place. Thinking about the bureaucratic priorities, the one that I'd really like to highlight, because I think it's my biggest concern here, is the emphasis on cash releasing. And top down, we're getting a lot of focus on, we need to focus on things that are cash releasing. So if, for example, you have a company where you're selling something into the NHS, where the benefit comes by someone not going into hospital in 2 to 3 years. All you've got to do, for example, is look at what Patricia Hewitt was saying in the Hewitt review around just the lack of ability to really prioritise upstream, actually tangibly put time, effort and money into upstream. That's a very difficult thing to be able to see as a priority at the moment, because obviously that's a long-term gain, and that needs developed health economic models that's hard for companies to be able to demonstrate at this particular time. And so in terms of priorities, unfortunately, short-termism is a big thing at the moment, particularly given we have an election probably in May, which means that, there's going to be a degree of let's wait and see what money comes in and what changes in the system. So I think we're in a very interesting time at the moment as we wait for this election to come up. So
yeah, very useful. I think actually if we pass the mic over to Mark, from an ICS angle, I'd be curious to get your take on this. What are the priorities that are top of mind for you at your trust or your ICB?
I think Roy mentioned one of them very much is around finances. Very clearly, that's a big challenge to us all, where we've got some funding that's offered and then potentially removed and everything. So we have to work with what we've got. Just picked up on the last comment from the previous presentation around, though, the biggest thing that supports a lot of what Liam was just saying there is around the data. We have to get our data correct. And if we're innovating and bringing solutions into any part of an ICB, so that's any, as I mentioned, the 11 providers or 11 organisations we work with, even if it's the most revolutionary thing, if it sits in a silo, it's not going to get any traction. We have to work to the data standards so it integrates either into a healthcare record, which is for the direct care, whether it goes for population health management, so we can deal with the population as a whole, but then we've also got to take the same data down into public health, which actually comes down to very large-term planning, but based on an individual. And we also then need it for research, so we need to look how we support our strategic data environments and also the National Federated Platform, so that we use data, store it once and store it cleverly. So if we're looking for innovation and breaking in, don't bring anything revolutionary that sits in a silo. It won't get, we can't plug it in. We don't want to have another interface. We don't want to have another product that says if we put this groovy interface, set the thing in. So my challenge is, how do we bring tech together to the benefit of the clinician, the care provider, the resident, the carer, that plugs together and plays? Those are my big drivers. Oh, and cost effectiveness, where do we get the money? Don't give us capital, please. But it's that kind of stuff. We do have innovation, and the innovation's got to show, but also be aware of the challenge that we have. Start small. And it really is, some of the stuff is start small. Yeah.
Yeah, so that interoperability component is pretty mission critical, it sounds like.
Integration more than interoperability. Yeah. Yes, we're into integration.
Perfect. Yeah, Rammy, it would be great to get your opinion on this as well.
Yeah, I think it very much depends on the ICS, because each ICS is different. But I think, kind of in my experience, when you look at how contracts are awarded, it's often very, very heavily weighted on price. Just kind of a prime example is a contract was awarded to a digital supplier where they awarded very favourably on price, but they scored low on information governance. So are we now saying that patient data is less important depending on price? So I think there's a lot of things that need to really kind of be taken into account then. And when you have organisations that are kind of spending £50 million on electronic patient records, then 6 months, 12 months down the line, they realise there's gaps. It's not doing everything that it needs to be doing. So I think we need to move away from focusing on price and really kind of focusing on like value, what this tech supplier is actually bringing to that ICS.
Perfect, very helpful. Oh yeah, one more thought, yeah.
We have to hold it a bit closer. Sorry if I was a bit quiet earlier to the people in the room. We have to move away from price being the definitive factor. It does not give you best value. Best value isn't purely price-based. It has to be ranged on a whole environment which is outcome-based, and we need to move to that outcome. Price is clearly important, and we need to be open and upfront with the budgets that we have. Otherwise, you'll invest, as an investor, a lot of time in trying to come to a market with something that we haven't got the budget for. But price should not be, we shouldn't be pacing purely on price.
Bring it.
I think a key thing to add is we need to think about longevity and kind of the future proof as well. I think often we look at the here and now. We need a solution for today to cover this problem, but we don't think about how it's going to impact later down the lines with changing in population health, etc. So I think that's something that the ICSs really need to think about, is longevity.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think we've talked a lot about the how ICSs are thinking about what they need to do. One other angle that we're also hearing a lot about from our customer base is they're encountering the what. What are ICSs actually pouring their resources into and their energies into? And I think it sets up well for a quick pop quiz for the audience. What we'll do is actually, I'll pop back over here. If you want to join our Slido, we're going to pop a question up on the screen. We'd love to get the audience's input. There are points at stake here, so please do participate. So what we'll actually do is, on the line of that thinking, or like, what are the priorities for ICSs? Question is basically on the what. Question is, what national strategic projects have the most funding allocated through ICSs in 23 and 24? So if you're on the Slido, I'll go ahead and pop the question up on the screen. The 4 options are elective care recovery, mental health modernization, electronic patient records, and community diagnostics as well. So I'll give about 5-10 seconds of awkward silence, and then we'll unpack these findings. panelists, as these results are coming in, any initial reactions about the hunches that the audience has about where the NHS and these ICSs are placing their strategic priorities from a funding perspective?
Oh, I've got the microphone, haven't I? So, obviously, the national money for EPRs is a lot less than it was, and so it probably would have been a lot more definitive if it was at the top. I suppose if we're talking about EPRs and we're thinking about local health and social care records and that as an extension of the systems, then yeah, that would absolutely make sense. I think if we said over the next 3 to 4 months, where would we be looking? I think it would be predominantly in elective care recovery and the money going into that, depending on what bundles come from the people up top. Mark?
Yeah, EPRs is obviously huge. If we think about the electronic patient record as a sort of data and making sure we've got that interoperability for direct care, but also for care planning. The term that's often used and branded around is levelling up, but as an ICB, we need to level up a system. So we need to bring all of the partners on into that level interoperability. Otherwise, we end up with a shiny beacon sitting somewhere with a unique electronic healthcare record that can't communicate. So we have to bring a whole system up. But part of that is, because of the limited funding that we have, is to have a clear roadmap where people can join when they have got the funding to join, so that you're not waiting. Downside of focusing purely on EPRs is for the organisations that are digitally mature, how do we nurture them and keep their investment going? Because if we only concentrate on levelling up, the people that are currently able to provide an EPR will slip backwards. They will naturally just fall backwards because we are not funding them to continue to develop and to innovate and to be at that forefront. So it's quite a dilemma, but EPRs is the big spend.
And will be for a long time, because if you take, for example, guys in St Thomas who've just finally got Epic in, 4-year project, 4, maybe 5, and they've been grossly underfunded for such a long period of time. This isn't like this year EPRs will be the thing, and then everyone have done EPRs and they'll move on to something else. This is what the next half a decade looks like, providing that continued funding goes into this.
Yeah, to be honest, I can't add much more to that. But I think electronic patient records has been such a massive focus, and I think it can become quite tunnel vision. They're only looking at EPRs, and then kind of other systems don't get an opportunity to kind of get a look in. So I think, nothing more to add to that, to be honest.
Yeah, and we see this a lot and hear this a lot from our customer base as well, around EPRs being just a major central system to making the fibre of all this work. Okay, so I'll reveal the answer. You may not be surprised to find that most all of these are receiving a large sum of allocation. But when we looked at actually our strategic investments deep dive report, what we found is that actually mental health modernization is actually a big funding outlier compared to previous history. You guys may have some opinions or thoughts on that. My hunch is that a lot of this is a result of local councils being more involved in these partnerships, health being viewed more as a holistic thing beyond just the classic medicinal health and support. But these are kind of the numbers that we're starting to see materialize across the NHS ICBs as well. So I'm conscious of time. I do want to move forward and talk through one more question to tie a bow on some of this, to try to put some practical examples in every supplier's hand of things that they can do to equip themselves moving forward. So I guess the last question here that I have for all of you is, what are your opinions on the best ways for health tech suppliers to engage and work with ICSs based on everything we've talked about, the opportunities, the challenges, concretely, and I'll press you on being concrete and specific so everyone in the room can walk away with one net new thing that they wouldn't have otherwise had. What are your thoughts? And Mark, maybe I'll start with you particularly. What do you wish suppliers knew, and what would you tell suppliers if you could?
It's a good one to start. It's sometimes easier to follow. Okay, so the one thing I want to know is when we start to do this is not to have a conversation about how we integrate the data that's going to be captured and generated and used. It really, really is that fundamental. So we need to make sure that we use the national data standards. The DTAC was mentioned, that we've got the DTAC, that's another overhead. But also how it fits in with the strategies that should all be published on the ICB's website. So we should have the overall aim and ambition, and remember that each of the ICBs has a completely different demographic and set of needs. So what works in one area doesn't necessarily lift and shift. It may need adapted when you come in. So because we talked about some of the innovation that's going on with Devon, I think earlier, they're quite good, and Yorkshire have been really good. That might not work in the centre of London. So we need to actually make sure that we've got the correct targeted things. There's a bit of research when you come knocking on the door, because that helps bring the confidence that you know. When I talk about the market, I'm talking about the local market that's in our little system. You know the residents that we're trying to deal with, the 4 places that we're trying to deal with, because they are quite different.
So the heat is on, the competition is on. Like, you're all queuing up to speak to Mark, right? So you're going to be the you're going to be the object of everyone's interest today. Like, I've advised 25 health tech companies, and I've spoken to many more. And there's a degree of solutionization and naivety where they come in and they go, here's some buzzwords, here's our solution, what are you going to do with it? And to be totally honest, if you want to survive in the NHS, you've got to be better. You've got to understand the strategic priorities of what the system's looking for. You've got to make it clear to them. Like, you've got to have all of the assets that you need, so Mark doesn't have to sit there and scratch his head trying to think about how to write a business case about you. You've got to go on and read the board minutes. You've got to understand what they're looking for. You've got to align with national priorities. You've got to make sure that, you know, there is a view to the long-term plan alignment around the major condition strategies, around the things that, you know, Mark and his chair, who's secretly hiding in the audience, are going to be looking at in their board meetings. So because it's all well and good getting somebody to look at it and say, oh, I'm interested in talking to you, but ultimately it's going to go up the chain, and someone who doesn't know about you, maybe doesn't really understand about digital, has to be able to understand how it's relevant to their strategic priorities. And I think it's really, really critical that you've got to be proactive and sophisticated. You need to have a good understanding of risk and mitigation around what the implementation journey is going to be around that. You have to try and make sure that you've covered all of your bases. And I think a lot of companies don't even really go into what the problem they're solving. I heard a term recently, there's a lot of health tech companies that are like a hammer that are looking for a nail, you know? And it's not Mark's job to find the nail for you, it's your job to find the nail for yourself. The final thing that I'd add before handing over to Rammy is, like, the NHS is complex, right? And the person who loves you isn't always necessarily going to be the person who puts a business case in for you or signs it off, or the person who sits in some specific committee to look at a very specific element. So the thing I always try and sit down with my clients and talk about is macro, micro, and milestone, right? Macro, you need something that, for example, if, you know, Mark's going to be putting this through, it has to think about health economics. It has to think about, you know, the things in the system that is the system consideration. But you've also got to have the micro, the person who sits down and stares that patient who's going to benefit from your technology in the eyes, and you need to be able to do things with them that helps it to be relevant so they can champion what you're doing. The final thing is you've got to think about getting through the maze of bureaucracy that is largely pretty much the case in every single NHS organisation. And for that, what we're talking about is the IG people, the IT people, the people who fill in the DPIAs, the project management office who need to know what implementation is going to look like. And you need to be able to come to them and say, this is what it's going to look like. As early stage, it might mean that you're trying to talk and listen and get some good hypotheses. But as you start to become, you know, ready to sit down with Mark or other CDIOs in the system, you've got to really be up close to this and not make it difficult for them to commission you, because otherwise you're going to get bounced up to the bottom of the list. Like, they don't have time, like huge cuts at the moment, local level, 40%, right? You don't have time to do all of the work for health tech companies. So you need to do the work. Otherwise, you don't really deserve to be on Mark's list here. Sorry, quite harsh, but this is what you need to succeed, right?
Okay,
And Rammy,
I'll keep it quick.
Yeah.
I think Liam and Mark have kind of hit the nail on the head there as well. I think it is really about understanding the NHS structure and understanding the challenges and the needs of that specific organisation. I think if you go in there trying to sell, you won't succeed. You really need to understand kind of what their key priorities are, whether it's looking at their digital strategy, going through kind of like CQC reports, see kind of where their challenges are. It's doing a lot of the groundwork and a lot of the hard work to really understand kind of those key requirements. And I think kind of that get early engagement as soon as you can, whether it's from the IT department, the IG, the CIOs, and try and bring as many people as you can into that conversation, because ideally you want to try and shorten that sales cycle rather than it being 12 months, 18 months, 2 years down the line and nothing's changed. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that was very helpful. I'm conscious we're close in time, and we want to leave a little bit of time for a couple of questions from the audience. So, unfortunately, I don't want to disappoint, but we're going to skip this pop quiz. Come talk to us at our booth after if you want to answer the question, get 10 points. Non-transferable, non-redeemable, but it's a fun exercise. So we'll go ahead and move forward. The question was basically along the lines of where the digital money is flowing, and the digital money is flowing to Cheshire and Merseyside is the big leader there. But I want to get into Q&A, and to do so, we're going to open Slido once again, wrap up with 2 questions from the audience, and then go from there. So let's see. Liam, maybe we'll pass this one over to you. Do you think it gives a health tech provider a better chance at securing the NHS if they already have private healthcare providers using the tech, or does it not often matter?
Not really. Like, maybe a little bit, but like I went to a dinner recently, and there was a couple of ICB chairs, and there was a very senior person from one of the private sector health organisations, and we were having a conversation about priorities and how they do it. And we've got to be very clear that an integrated care system is materially different from a private sector provider. And yes, like if you sit down with Mark, sorry, you're constantly on Mark here, but you sit down with Mark or Cheshire and Merseyside, and you say we're not in anywhere, then you've got a better conversation to say you're in a private sector, provider. But I think you need to be realistic about how much that's going to carry. Like, the NHS is a very sort of it's a big organisation, but a culturally insular organisation. And the biggest thing that influences one NHS organisation is another NHS organisation. Realistically, private coverage is going to not necessarily carry a huge amount of weight. But if that's what you've got, that's what you've got to work with. So work with what you've got.
Very good. We've got 4 people typing. We've got 2 minutes on the clock. I guess.
Could I just do
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Just remember, I'm here to support the people providing the support to the residents and people. So that the CDIO just wouldn't be making a decision on that. It would be a clinical-based decision or a healthcare-based decision. You have to win, not just a CDIO.
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm being facetious in pointing to you all the time, Mark, but yeah.
Perfect. One more question here. How can you ensure the equity of services within an ICB? For example, in one ICB, the funding for care or support is varied. So the experience of a patient, Mark, if you don't mind ducking down very quickly, with cares is different depending on the postcode that they live in. Any reactions there across the board?
Mark, you're an ICB. I'm going to hand this to you.
We absolutely have to get rid of that, because the biggest driver, you mentioned it, is health inequalities and making sure that the access is equitable for everybody, and that is one of the 4 founding principles of an ICB. So if that's local, that should absolutely be charged with the ICB to remove.
Very good. Okay, we have a few more questions. The panel will be at the back after the session if you want to ask your questions one-on-one or in person. We do need to wrap up here to make sure we keep the day going. The last thing I just want to say is thank you for joining us. Thank you for spending your time every day. The main thing that we really revolved around here is this idea of focus and empathy. At the end of the day, if you're spending your time spraying and praying around the market and providing solutions, but not talking about problems, you're going to have a hell of a time working your way into these integrated care systems. So we really appreciate you guys coming today. If you need any support, any resources, tools, strategies, or advice, again, everyone will be at the back. And then Stotles' booth and a lot of our reports and data insights will be available at the very front of the conference. Again, thank you, and hope you all have a good day.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Leave your chairs. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Really interesting. I mean, while we're just changing speakers, Mark, come here. Do you know yet what it is you want? Is it too early for you to really know what you want?
So data's key for me, Roy, absolutely key, and making sure that we've got the integration, interoperability around the data, and that's across the full system. That's everything to do.
So that's your primary number one concern?
My number one concern.
Mutualization of the data or whatever. And
absolutely.
Have you got the analytics? Have you got the people to do the analysis?
analytics is a really scarce resource, especially data scientists, where we go beyond just looking at reports. We've got to take the reports from information to intelligence to actionable outcomes.
Yeah.
So it really is, and that starts to feed in, and we feed that whole circle about, have we made an intervention? Has it made a difference? Has it made a positive difference?
Yeah.
Do we keep going? But we have to have that complete loop of the data.
Thank you. Let me sneak in a little question. Well, a big round of applause for Mark. Thank you.